Right now, the playoffs are getting all the attention, but in just a couple of days, one team's future is going to completely change. We will find out the landing spot for possibly the most sought-after prospect since LeBron, 7'4", freak of nature Victor Wembanyama. This could completely alter the landscape of the league going forward, but what are your team's chances at getting him? The draft lottery is complex. Let's try to simplify it real quick. The most common misconception is that each team in the lottery has a chance at each spot. That is not the case. Here are the lottery odds going into Tuesday. The best odds belong to the Pistons, Spurs, and Rockets. They've got a 14% chance at number 1. All the way down at the bottom, you've got the Pelicans with just a 0.5% chance. But a team like the Pelicans only has a few spots they could end up. You see, on top of their odds for number 1, they also have odds for the top 4, which right now sits at 2.4%. I know this is getting a little complicated, but just bear with me. The Pelicans will either jump to the top 4, jump to number 1, or stay at 14. That is it. There is not a scenario where they have the 5th to the 13th overall selection. Now for teams ahead of the Pelicans, there's a couple more landing spots. Take the Mavericks at 10, for example. This is one of the most important positions to pay attention to on Tuesday. Just like the Pelicans, they could jump into the top 4, they could jump to number 1, stay at 10, which is the most likely scenario, but they also could drop down. If the Bulls, Thunder, Raptors, Pelicans, or any combination of these teams were to jump into the top 4, the Mavericks would fall accordingly. For example, let's say the Thunder jump up. The Mavericks would now be at 11. That is a big deal, as they're only keeping their selection if it's at 10 or higher. If they drop down just a spot, that selection is going to be going to New York. The other key spot to pay attention to is Chicago. Right now, their pick's going to Orlando, unless they jump into the top 4. Hopefully, you're with me here. You either jump into the top 4, stay put, or drop based on the teams below you that jump up. This is why in the middle of the lottery, you'll already start to see them call out teams with a guaranteed top 4 selection. But now let's take a look at some simulations so you get an idea of the possibilities we could see go down. Now you're just gonna have to believe me, but there's no cherry picking. These are legitimately my first few simulations. We start things off pretty tamed. We don't see any movement at the bottom. The Magic hold on to Chicago's selection, and the Mavericks stay at 10. But in the middle of the lottery, we do see Portland, Indiana, Orlando, and Washington all dropping down a spot, meaning a team has jumped up. Then we see Detroit at 5. That's a tough scene. That is quite literally the lowest spot in the draft they could be. Another top odd team, Houston, they fall down, they're at 4. It's up for debate, but there's a few distinct tiers in this draft. In a tier of his own, you've got Wembanyama. After that, the consensus 2 guy seems to be Scoot Henderson, but just behind him, you have Brandon Miller that many believe could still go ahead of Scoot depending on the team that ends up at 2. That's the clear top 3. After that, the debates really start. So falling out of that area is significant. In this case, the 3rd overall pick belongs to the Utah Jazz. An interesting team to rise to the top with a really solid foundation being put together there. This is where most thought they would be coming into the season. In some ways, they kind of get bailed out here, jumping up 6 spots. I think this spot, considering the teams ahead, would most likely result in Brandon Miller, the 6'9" Alabama wing that was one of the most prolific three-point shooters in the country, drawing Paul George comparisons on a nightly basis. Alongside Markkanen and Walker Kessler, it would be hard not to get excited about this team going forward. The 2nd overall pick's going to San Antonio, a fitting spot after trading away their all-star point guard DeJounte Murray a year ago. Here, they find his replacement, and an incredible one at that. An extremely well-rounded and explosive point guard in Scoot Henderson, who projects to be an elite, above-the-rim finisher and Tier 1 playmaker. It will ultimately be his development beyond the perimeter that really dictates where his ceiling is, but going to a team that's already been stacking up great young forwards like Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson, on paper, things would be setting up very well for them. And then, the number 1 overall pick, the winner of the Wembanyama sweepstakes, the Charlotte Hornets. Not the most exciting landing spot, but it's also not the Spurs. The Hornets will be going forward with the young duo of LaMelo and Wembanyama, with the potential of someone like Miles Bridges returning to this roster if they can avoid injuries. We've already seen this roster as it stands right now being a play-in caliber team. I think in the context of that, it's kind of an interesting spot. I'm pretty sure everyone wants to see one of the greatest prospects of our time in a competitive scenario as soon as possible. Our second simulation was another very inline one. We actually see no movement from 6 all the way to 14. The first team to be moving is the Spurs. They're at 5, dropping down 2 spots, most likely taking who's left of the 6'7" Thompson twins, freak athletes with insane ceilings. The team at 4 is going to have their choice of the twins. In this case, that's going to be the Charlotte Hornets. The Pistons are at 3. It's a weird spot for them. In most scenarios, I think it most likely results in Brandon Miller, but I'm not sure that would necessarily be the case here. For a team like Detroit, fit, need, won't, or at least shouldn't mean anything to them right now. They will take Miller or Scoot, whoever is there, but it's hard to say who that would be, as the Portland Trailblazers are sitting at number 2. It's crazy that a team with Damian Lillard, a team that got aggressive and traded for Jeremy Grant on the last year of his deal, is in prime position for a top pick But here we are. Not only is this one of the most interesting teams just to be up here, but this is a very interesting spot specifically. I think it could be the foundation of a blockbuster trade. If a pick is made, on paper Brandon Miller seems like the better fit with the presence of guys like Anthony Simons and Shaedon Sharpe, even if the Lillard era comes to an end. But they also might feel that they're sacrificing too much value going for Miller over Scoot, which could just expedite the end of the Lillard era, with Scoot being his replacement. We could see an eerily similar situation to what we saw with the Pelicans in 2019, landing a top prospect and in the same offseason trading their franchise talent in a blockbuster trade. And then we get to the number 1 pick, which in this case belongs to the Houston Rockets. A fascinating landing spot, and that might be an understatement. If Wembanyama was just joining the group and system we saw in place last season, a team of young players practically just playing pickup with no defense or proper offense in place, I wouldn't be excited. But it seems extremely inevitable that a very different team in Houston is on the horizon. I say that for 2 key reasons. The addition of head coach Ime Udoka, who has proven himself to be one of the premier coaches in the league today. He is the man for the job to flip the mentality we saw from the Rockets on the court this past year. He comes with scandal and controversy. I have no interest to speak to that, as we've gotten little information in regards to the details, but assuming that won't be a problem going forward, it's a great addition, strictly speaking, basketball. Especially when you consider their contract situation. Not only do they have some of the most cap space in the league, but they also lack control of their upcoming selections in the draft, drastically decreasing their incentive to be tanking over the next couple years. It's very likely we see them get aggressive and go after high-priced free agents very soon. It's also not out of the question we actually see them trade some of these young pieces and practically end the rebuild overnight. A pill that would be a lot easier to swallow if you're getting freaking Victor Wembanyama. What a scenario. I mean, we've seen the rumors of guys like James Harden and Jaylen Brown. The Jaylen Brown situation is a little less realistic with the All-NBA selection, but man, would it be fun to see a duo like that playing with a guy like Wemby. Someone that's definitely not coming in with your typical rookie expectations. Many believe we will see Zion, Luka level immediate success. In our third simulation, we've got our biggest riser so far. Detroit's really been getting the bad end of the stick here. Once again, they're at the worst spot possible, number 5. San Antonio is at 4. Houston's at 3, presumably getting Brandon Miller, a scenario that might produce the exact opposite of what we just mentioned. Maybe they wait a year on the big spending, and on paper have this young but intriguing 5-man group of KPJ, Jalen Green, Brandon Miller, Jabari Smith, and Şengün. Then at 2, we've got the Orlando Magic, one of my favorite landing spots for Scoot Henderson. They've been having some decent success in the draft lately, most notably bringing in the forward duo of Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. They also found their center in Wendell Carter through the Vucevic trade. But their backcourt has been this wild revolving door, especially at the point guard position, with guys like Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony, and Markelle Fultz. Here they take their 3rd first-round point guard in 4 years, but this one just might be the answer. I think you would be a fool to not be bullish on this team going forward after a selection like this, especially with them also holding the 11th overall selection in this simulation. A spot that sets them up really well to take a big risk, shoot for upside, go after someone like Nick Smith or Keontae George. Then, with the number 1 pick, we've got the Washington Wizards. A weird scenario. You've got Bradley Beal on this absurd contract. They could be moderately competitive very soon with an addition like this, but they also face some tough contract decisions. They've got to decide what they want to do with Kristaps and Kyle Kuzma, both guys coming off impressive seasons, but with that, it's going to come some pretty big price tags that could turn into questionable contracts very quickly. There's a scenario where they have almost all their financial resources committed to those 3 guys. It's a situation that's going to happen with or without Victor Wembanyama, so they're not complaining, but it would be interesting to see how Wembanyama would affect their decision making. Would we see them still try to bring back Kristaps and try out the biggest frontcourt in league history, 7'3" Porzingis and 7'4" Wembanyama? I don't love this landing spot, but at the very least it's interesting. The next simulation was just fun. A team has jumped up. Someone has leapfrogged the Mavericks. They moved down, so yes, their first rounder will be going to New York. A team that I think every New York fan is really hoping is the foundational piece of a big trade. That really feels like the next move from this franchise, after what we saw from Brunson and what we just didn't see from someone like Randall. The 4th spot is going to be Orlando, most likely getting a Thompson twin, but then at 3, we've got the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think almost every basketball viewer, Thunder fan or not, is kind of hoping we see Oklahoma City get some lottery luck. It's just such an interesting situation brewing with a plethora of fun young talent that's now led by an All-NBA first-team guard, and they still have the 2nd overall pick in last year's draft joining this team next season. Like in one of the earlier simulations, Portland is at 2 again, so it doesn't feel like there'd be a guaranteed selection for OKC. Brandon Miller seems the most likely, but for a team that's so young, it's odd that whoever this selection is most likely beginning their career off the bench. It's just a testament to how crazy this scenario is. There's a world where the Thunder are looking at Scoot Henderson, Kenrich Williams, Isaiah Joe, and the other Jalen Williams coming off the bench. At that point, I don't think there'd be a fool willing to sell their Thunder stock. And then finally, Detroit, the team with the worst record in the league, gets the top spot. Wembanyama joins Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham. I can't really decide where my excitement level is for this specific scenario. I think it would really be decided based on how good Cade looks when he comes back. But I'm just having a lot of fun with these simulations, so let's do another one. And oh my god, good thing I did. This one is insane. I promise there's no shenanigans here. Our 5th simulation would cause chaos in the Twitter streets. Let me just tell you some teams at the bottom so you can get an idea of what might be ahead. Oklahoma City is at 13. Utah drops 2 spots to 11. Going up, San Antonio is at 6, the worst spot they could be. Detroit is at 5 once again, the worst spot they could be. If it wasn't already extremely clear, there's some big risers here. One of those being the Dallas Mavericks, a team that might not even have their selection, in this case, is at 4. What the heck would they do here? Would they take a Thompson twin? Would they be willing to go need and take a guy like Jarris Walker, or an even bigger risk with someone like Taylor Hendricks? Or would this pick be moved in a trade in the hopes of bringing back Kyrie and putting together a contending group as soon as possible? It's a crazy jump, but just wait. The Hornets are able to get Brandon Miller at 3. The Rockets get their backcourt mate to Jalen Green at 2, possibly go Brandon Miller if they want to double down on KPJ. Those spots are crazy, but remember how I said Oklahoma was at 13? Quick reminder, they've got the 12th spot in the lottery. That means one of 2 teams is getting Wembanyama in this simulation. The Raptors, who had just a 1% chance, or the Pelicans with just a 0.5% chance.
Means that the number 1 pick in the NBA draft goes to the New Orleans Pelicans.
Insane. The team that started the year as one of the best teams in the league before injuries tore them apart is somehow, some way, getting Victor Wembanyama. This is ridiculous. So a strong case can be made that in this scenario, the Pelicans would have now drafted the 3 best prospects since LeBron, that being Anthony Davis, Zion Williamson, and now Wembanyama. If he is who we think he is, this wouldn't just be some fun scenario. We might be talking about New Orleans as contenders as soon as a year from now. Just the idea of teams having to face minutes where they're being guarded by Herbert Jones, Wembanyama, and Zion is something so unique, I don't think we have anything to compare it to. Just things as little as Zion and Wembanyama's speed to close out on the perimeter from the front court would shrink the court so drastically, I think an historical defensive unit would be inevitable. That was crazy, but now let's just cherry pick some fun possibilities. We've got Portland going to 1. At the very least, Lillard and Wemby would be fun to watch. In that same sim, you've got the Mavericks at 3. When they were at 4, making a selection seemed questionable. At 3 and getting Brandon Miller, now that's interesting. Then we see the Magic at 2 and Dallas now at 1. I think this would have to be the most electric scenario. The 2 greatest foreign prospects the league has ever seen taking the court together. Just imagine if they didn't F up the Brunson situation. And then boom, the Oklahoma City Thunder land Wembanyama, setting the stage for the Rookie of the Year battle in their own front court. Chet versus Wemby.